500 tons. That is the number most serious researchers agree on when they try to put a weight on what may be buried on a single island 550 kilometers off the coast of Costa Rica. 500 tons of gold, silver, and jewels, and in over 300 documented expeditions across 2 centuries, not one verified coin has ever been brought back. Not one. The island is real. The ships that went there are real. The men who died searching are real. So where is it? Tonight we go to Cocos Island, the only place on Earth where the legend, the geography, and the historical paper trail all point to the same patch of jungle. And the answer, when we finally get there, is not the one anyone expected. 3 separate treasure caches from 3 completely different historical events are said to converge on this one island. We will track all 3, and one of them has a paper trail so solid that a Costa Rican government commission took it seriously enough to fund a dig. Picture a wall of green rising straight out of the Pacific. No beach, no gentle slope, just jungle cliffs dropping sheer into water so dark it looks black. That is Cocos Island. 24 square kilometers of near vertical rock and rainforest, sitting alone about 500 kilometers southwest of the Costa Rican coast, with nothing between it and the horizon in any direction. The island receives roughly 7 meters of rain every year, enough to keep a dozen waterfalls running continuously, several of them falling directly into the sea without touching ground first. 2 bays break the coastline: Chatham Bay to the northeast, Wafer Bay to the northwest. They are the only places a vessel can anchor with any confidence, which means every ship that has ever come here has funneled through one of those 2 narrow windows. Nobody lives here permanently. The population is 0, apart from a rotating handful of Costa Rican park rangers. The surrounding water is another barrier entirely. Hammerhead sharks school here in numbers that make the shallows look like they are moving. The open ocean crossing from the mainland takes roughly 36 hours in good conditions, longer when the swells run heavy. What that geography actually means is this: anything hidden here stays hidden, not because of clever engineering, but because the island itself is the lock. 7 meters of annual rain reshapes the ground constantly. Searchers have found that landmarks noted one decade simply do not exist the next. If this is the kind of deep dive you are into, real history, real ships, real stakes, hit subscribe. We do this every week. The geography of the island explains its isolation, but isolation alone does not explain the treasure. What explains the treasure is the water. Cocos sits at the crossing of 2 invisible highways, the Humboldt Current pushing cold water up from the south, and the deepwater lane the Spanish called the Ruta de la Plata, the Silver Road, running from Lima north to Acapulco. Galleons loaded with Andean silver needed roughly 6 weeks on that passage, and they needed fresh water badly. Cocos was the only reliable source for something close to 1,500 kilometers in any direction. Those waterfalls falling straight into the sea were, to a 16th century captain, the difference between survival and a dying crew. So every ship stopped. Merchant galleons, naval escorts, and the men hunting them all funneled through Chatham Bay or Wafer Bay to fill their casks. By the 1680s, Cocos appears by name in admiralty logs, in buccaneer depositions, in the margins of captured Spanish charts. The word buccaneer itself traces back to the French boucanier, men who smoke-dried meat, originally on Hispaniola, before turning to raiding. The island was not a secret. It was a crossroads. And crossroads are where things get taken. What pulled the first real treasure hunters to Cocos was not rumor in the abstract, it was a name. Benito Bonito. Sailors along the Mexican Pacific coast knew him as Bonito of the Bloody Sword, and the title was not decorative. Operating out of the coastal raid lanes in the years just before Mexican independence, he hit silver mule trains and coastal traders with enough regularity that his name entered British naval correspondence as a genuine operational problem. The story goes that Bonito made at least one landfall on Cocos, buried a substantial cache of plate and coins somewhere above Chatham Bay, and was captured and hanged. The date given in most accounts is around 1821, before he could return for it. The evidence is thin and worth saying plainly. A handful of sailor depositions, a rough hand-drawn chart that began circulating in British naval ports sometime in the 1820s, and, the detail that actually matters, at least 2 Royal Navy officers who took it seriously enough to detour to Cocos while on active service. Officers do not risk their careers on pub gossip. The chart itself became the first commodity the island ever produced, copied, sold, and forged so many times that by the 1850s there were no fewer than 6 mutually incompatible authentic versions in circulation, each placing the cache in a different cove. The original, if it ever existed, is gone. What remained was a market. And a market means someone is always buying. That market for Benito's chart pulled in a second legend, older, grander, and considerably harder to pin down. The story runs like this. When Pizarro captured Atahualpa in 1532 and demanded the famous ransom, a room filled with gold to roughly the height of a man's outstretched hand, runners were already moving tribute across the Inca road network from Cuzco, Quito, and the coastal valleys. The claim, repeated in various forms across 3 centuries of treasure lore, is that a portion of that gold never reached Pizarro at all. Intercepted, diverted, or simply pocketed along the way, it supposedly passed through enough undocumented hands to eventually reach the Pacific coast, and from there, somehow, to Cocos. Historians are blunt about this version. The chain of custody has too many gaps, and the quantities cited in popular accounts tend to double with each retelling. What is real, and what the legend feeds on, is this. Spanish colonial ledgers do record systematic discrepancies between gold assessed at source in Peru and gold logged on arrival in Panama. The shortfall was genuine. Where it went, tribute skimmed by local administrators, losses at sea, simple corruption, the records do not say. Not proof of a buried cache. Proof only that significant weight went unaccounted for, somewhere on that route. That somewhere has been Cocos ever since. Lima Hoard, Bonito's gold, or the Inca ransom? Which one do you think is actually real? Drop it below. 3 separate legends, 3 separate centuries, and every single one of them lands on the same 24 square kilometers of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific. At this point, the question isn't whether people believed it. They clearly did, sometimes fatally. The question is whether anyone had a genuine reason to. One man did. He had a real ship, a real war bearing down on him, and exactly 72 hours to make the worst decision of his life. One man did have a documented reason. Not a legend passed through 3 centuries of retelling. A real colonial inventory, a real ship, and a real crisis with a deadline measured in days. By early 1820, independence forces were closing on Lima from the south. The Spanish viceroy faced a straightforward problem: roughly 680 tons of accumulated ecclesiastical and state treasure sitting in a city about to change hands. The official inventory was specific enough to be uncomfortable reading: a solid gold statue of the Virgin Mary set with jewels, 113 gold religious figurines, 200 chests of gold coin, 273 swords with gilded hilts, church plate, vestments, reliquaries. The kind of inventory a colonial bureaucrat writes when he genuinely expects to retrieve the contents later. It was loaded aboard a British merchant brig called the Mary Dear under Captain William Thompson, a real vessel documented in the trade records of the period. Thompson's instructions were simple: sail north to Mexico, anchor in a safe port, and wait for the political situation to resolve. That instruction assumed Thompson would do what he was paid to do. He had a crew, open water, and a hold worth more than most men would see across several lifetimes. The viceroy never saw a single coin of it again. What Thompson did next is the hinge on which every subsequent expedition turns. He did not sail north. Somewhere in those first days at sea, the exact moment unrecorded, the conversation unwitnessed, he and his crew turned on the Spanish guards aboard, killed them, and put the bodies over the rail. Then they changed course for Cocos. According to Thompson's own later testimony, they went ashore, buried the entire cargo, and sailed on. A Spanish warship caught them within weeks. The trial was brief. Every man aboard was condemned. Thompson and his first mate alone bargained their way off the gallows by offering to lead the Spanish back to the burial site. They went ashore at Cocos with an armed escort, and then they walked into the jungle and did not come back. The Spanish searched for days. They left empty-handed. Thompson eventually resurfaced in Newfoundland, old, broke, and still talking. He spent his remaining years trying to find a wealthy backer willing to fund a return voyage, reportedly sketching rough maps for anyone who would listen. No expedition he attached himself to ever sailed. He died without going back. The maps, if they ever existed in any precise form, died with him, or passed through enough hands to become something else entirely. What Thompson left behind was not just a story, it was a document. Reportedly, in the 1840s, he passed a hand-drawn map and written sailing directions to a Newfoundland mariner named John Keating. That handoff is the first moment in this chain where something physical changes hands between two traceable people. Keating made 2 voyages to Cocos, the first around 1844, the second sometime in the 1850s. The second trip produced nothing publicly. The first trip produced something that witnesses in St. John's actually held in their hands: gold coins and a sword with a gilded hilt. He showed them around. He said almost nothing about where they came from. The sword's description, the weight, the decorative work on the crossguard, has been matched by researchers to the style of colonial Lima manufacture, the same workshops supplying the church plate inventoried before Thompson ever weighed anchor. Those witnesses are the reason this link holds. Not a legend passed mouth to mouth across a century, but named people in a documented port town who saw metal they could not explain away. Keating never mounted a full recovery. He never sold the location. He died with it, which is either the behavior of a man who found something real and chose to keep it, or of a man who found just enough to believe and spent the rest of his life unable to find it again. Both possibilities are equally uncomfortable. The biggest cache and the most credible paper trail is still ahead. Subscribe so the algorithm does not bury it on you. Would you fund an expedition to Cocos if you had the money? Yes or hard no? What Keating's silence points toward is not mysticism, it is geology. Every account of failed digging frames the island as something almost willful, a place that swallows effort and returns nothing. But the mechanism is not fate. It is fractured basalt beneath your feet, and roughly 7 meters of annual rainfall pressing down from above. The island's volcanic substrate is not solid. It is cracked through, a sponge, not a vault. In the valley floors, where every serious expedition has focused, the permanent water table sits at roughly 2 meters down. Dig past that line, and you are not excavating a cache, you are opening a well. 19th century crews with hand shovels hit standing water before they hit anything else. They pumped. The water came back faster than they could clear it. They pumped again. Same result. 20th century expeditions brought mechanical pumps and reached the same conclusion. The aquifer does not drain. It is fed continuously from above, recharged by rainfall that the jungle canopy traps and funnels straight down into the rock. So anything buried deeper than 2 meters in those valleys, deliberately or not, is now sitting inside a permanent natural aquifer, unreachable without engineering on a scale no private expedition has ever funded. The island does not guard its secret through mystery. It guards it through physics. And physics does not negotiate. That physics, the 2-meter water table, the aquifer that cannot be drained, did not discourage anyone. If anything, it confirmed to the next generation that something worth hiding must be down there. From the 1880s onward, Cocos stopped being a rumor and became a destination. August Gissler arrived in 1889 with a German colonial charter and 17 years of his life. Officially, he was there to build a settlement. In practice, the settlement never exceeded a handful of residents, and the digging never stopped. He left in 1908 with neither colony nor bullion. A British-backed syndicate landed in 1905 with steam-powered pumps, the first serious mechanical attempt to beat the aquifer. The pumps lost. The water table won, same as always. At least 3 American expeditions followed through the 1920s, each funded by private investors who believed the previous failure was a matter of insufficient equipment rather than insurmountable geology. What every one of these groups found instead were hand-cut stone channels running through the valley floors. Colonial-era water management, almost certainly. Drainage infrastructure cut by Spanish crews to supply ships at anchor. But to men already primed to find evidence, the channels looked like deliberate markers. They mapped them. They published the maps. And the maps drew the next expedition, which arrived looking for what the previous one had misread. The legend was now self-replicating, and self-replicating legends eventually attract powerful believers. Franklin Roosevelt visited Cocos 3 times, 1935, 1938, and 1940, aboard the heavy cruiser USS Houston and later the USS Tuscaloosa. Officially, fishing expeditions. Roosevelt genuinely loved deep-sea fishing, and the waters off Cocos are extraordinary. But he also brought charts traced back through the Keating lineage, and crew members later recalled him spending evenings below deck studying them against the ship's own survey maps. He found nothing, not a coin, not a confirmed marker. What he left behind, though, was more powerful than any artifact. When word spread, and it spread quickly, that a sitting American president had sailed to a remote Costa Rican island, not once but 3 times, the reasonable public conclusion was obvious. He knew something the rest of us didn't. He almost certainly didn't. But that distinction collapsed entirely in the post-war years, when American, British, and French adventurers began citing the presidential visits as de facto validation. If the White House had charts, the charts must be real. If Roosevelt went back twice after finding nothing, the target must simply be deeper. The island had just acquired its most credible endorsement, from a man who never found a single thing there. But here is what no one puts in the expedition brochure. By the mid-20th century, Cocos had a body count. At least 3 men dead from falls in the interior ravines. 1 diver killed by a shark during a survey dive. Several more taken by fever. And Costa Rica, which owns every square meter of that island, had been watching foreigners tear up its territory for decades. Something was about to change. 300 expeditions, 0 verified finds. Human obsession or genuine evidence? Tell me what you think. That body count was exactly the argument Costa Rica needed. In 1978, the government declared Cocos Island a national park, formally ending the era of open-season excavation. 19 years later, in 1997, UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site, citing one of the last genuinely pristine coral ecosystems in the eastern Pacific. The reef systems around the island are extraordinary by any measure. Hammerhead aggregations, whale shark feeding grounds, species counts that draw marine biologists from across the world. The ecological case did not require any exaggeration. What makes the government's position interesting is what it has never said. Costa Rican officials have not officially declared the treasure a fiction. They have simply asserted, with considerable diplomatic care, that whatever may lie beneath the soil is worth less than what lives above it. That is not a denial, that is a calculation. The practical consequence is this: every expedition since 1978 has had to arrive wearing a different name. Research trip, survey dive, biological census. Park rangers are stationed on the island permanently now, and they check equipment manifests. Several teams have been caught with ground-penetrating tools and core sampling gear and expelled without ceremony. The treasure, if it exists, is now held in place by 2 separate legal frameworks and 1 international treaty. The water table has an ally. The legal wall didn't stop the search, it redirected it. If you can't dig, you scan. Ground-penetrating radar surveys run through the 1990s and into the 2000s targeted Chatham Bay specifically, the inlet where Thompson is supposed to have landed. The equipment picked up several subsurface anomalies, dense, compact masses sitting below the waterlogged soil at depths between roughly 4 and 10 meters, consistent with large metallic concentrations, according to the teams running the surveys. The problem is resolution. At that depth, through saturated volcanic rock, a colonial-era chest and a basalt intrusion return nearly identical signatures. In 2012, a robotic survey vehicle swept the underwater approaches and found something more tangible, what appeared to be worked stone on the seafloor at about 18 meters. Cut edges, right angles. The Costa Rican Park Authority permitted a limited, non-invasive examination. No lifting, no extraction. Divers confirmed the stones were cut. No associated artifacts were recovered. It may be the remains of a jetty. It may be a collapsed cave entrance. The authority closed the site. The cut stones are still there at 18 meters. The tide moves over them twice a day. What the ground-penetrating radar cannot tell you, the port ledgers can, at least partially. The maritime record is the most underused source in this entire debate. Peter Gerhard, a historian who spent years cross-referencing Spanish colonial port books from Callao and Panama City in the 1960s, found something quietly devastating. A vessel matching the Mary Dear's description and registry appears in the Callao departure logs for 1820. She cleared the harbor, she was logged out, and then nothing. No arrival entry at Panama City, no record of seizure, no wreck report filed with the colonial administration. She simply vanishes from the ledger mid-route. In a colonial bureaucracy that tracked even minor coastal traders with obsessive regularity, an unrecorded disappearance is not a clerical oversight. It is an event. Something happened to that ship and her cargo between Callao and Panama, and the Spanish administration, for all its paperwork, never recovered what had been loaded aboard her. That absence is not a treasure map. It does not tell you where anything went. But it does close one door firmly. The cargo was not quietly offloaded in Panama and absorbed into official channels. Whatever left Callao in 1820 did not arrive anywhere the empire was watching. The ledger ends, the island begins. So here is the answer that 3 centuries of expeditions never came back with. Cocos sits at the only reliable freshwater source on the deepwater corridor between Lima and Acapulco, a lane that carried more silver per decade than most empires saw in a lifetime. Every captain on that route knew the island, which means Benito Bonito knew it. The Lima Cathedral chapter's desperate envoys knew it. And William Thompson, with a hold full of someone else's gold, knew exactly where to steer. 3 separate men, 3 separate centuries, one logical choice. The convergence is not mythology compounding mythology. It is geography. The legend did not create the hiding place. The hiding place created the legend. The Costa Rican government commission that excavated the island found disturbed soil, hand-cut stone channels, and iron fittings consistent with 18th century Spanish hardware. No bullion. Their official conclusion was blunt. Either an unknown party recovered part of the cache before 1900, or it lies below the permanent water table at a depth that 19th century tools could not breach. That second possibility is the one that closes everything. The island's volcanic hydrology, the same geology that pushes 5 meters of rainfall a year straight down through fractured basalt, has raised the water table over the burial horizon. The radar anomalies are real. The cut stones at 18 meters are real. The Port Ledger Gap is real. But the technology capable of reaching what is down there is also the technology that Costa Rican law and UNESCO designation make illegal to deploy. 500 tons, 550 kilometers offshore, underwater that rises a little more each year. The island is not hiding anything. Physics just never needed a lock. 500 tons, 1 island, 300 expeditions. And the thing standing between us and the answer is not a map. It is a water table and a UNESCO designation. If you want to go deeper on the ships that actually vanished on that Lima to Panama run, the colonial port records, the ones that never arrived, that is the next episode. Drop below.